Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1939 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Vivien Leigh won for her performance in Gone with the Wind. But why did she beat fellow nominees Bette Davis, Irene Dunne, Greta Garbo, and Greer Garson? We'll explore all this and more today on the season finale of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 12th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1939. Pretty big year for Hollywood. And we'll be discussing why Vivien Leigh won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest doesn't know this, I don't think. I'll introduce him in a second, but this is the season finale. So we're ending with the 30s here in strong fashion because my guest today is someone who I would say is worthy of the season finale slot. One of the bigger Oscar obsessives probably in the world. He is a writer for Jimmy Kimmel Live, co-host of the Keep It podcast. So pleased to welcome to the show, Louis Virtel.
I mean, it's the season finale. It feels like there should be a death or something.
Well,
like this is the episode where Irving Thalberg passes away or something.
Yes. Well, sadly, it's the death of Greta Garbo's Oscar run. I'll say that. So,
That's true.
you know.
That's true. Hopefully we can get into a real Camille discussion today, too.
Possibly.
I guess you would have just had that a couple of episodes ago.
We did, but in the totality of her career, we'll certainly bring that up, too. But yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
I am thrilled to be here. You and I have, of course, the same disease. I mean, it sort of feels like we're in some sort of 12-step community right now. We're dealing with our issues pertaining to actresses and the grip they have on our necks.
Mm-hmm. We just got to talk it out. Yes.
Right, yes. Gasp it out as we are gagged for them.
Exactly. Well, before we talk about 1939, let's talk about Best Actress as a category, which you have opinions on. We know this. But my first question that I have to ask is, Louis, what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
I will try not to be long-winded, but I will say my answer to this has changed so many times. As in, I can mark phases of my life based on when I thought certain people were the best ever. I used to be the most obsessed with Faye Dunaway, just a complete sociopath win because it's that's kind of an anomaly in the category. And then, I had my Judy Holliday moment. I had my Vivien Leigh in Streetcar moment. I would say now, though, I don't know that it's the most skilled performance, but I do think it's the one I had to go back and watch again to get all the nuance of how much I love it. And it's my favorite Best Actress nominated year is Maggie Smith in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
Of course. Yes. That is one of those performances where it feels like not a lot of the casual movie-going audience may have seen, but those who have and love this performance truly love this performance and can't stop recommending it to people who haven't seen it. So
correct. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the few performances I've ever seen where it makes you want to join her cult. Mm-hmm. Like it makes you want to give up your life. And I go to a weird boarding school where I'm taught strange things about older men and art and summers in Italy, and I put down the critical part of my brain that knows this woman is a sociopath.
Right.
But
it's fine. Yeah. We look past these things because it's Maggie Smith. Yeah, well, my other question, as much as we love a deserved Oscar win like Maggie Smith, we also have many examples of Oscar losses that are just truly devastating, especially for people like us. So what would you rank as the most upsetting Oscar loss for you in Best Actress?
The word upsetting is key here because by upsetting, to me, that means I personally experienced it. So, I can't really speak to, what it would have felt like, watching Judy Garland lose to Grace Kelly, for example. But in my lifetime, I will actually pick something surprisingly recent, which is Charlotte Rampling losing to Brie Larson. To me, that was the best performance of the 2010s, a shattering movie, and just a performance that gave you everything, even when nothing was going on. Even just a simple glance said a lot. I thought the dialogue was super crisp, and she was just the perfect fit for that movie. And she was not on any sort of prestige track running up to that, really. So it felt super triumphant to me too. No shade to Brie Larson, that's not a win anybody hates, but I just love Charlotte Rampling.
I mean, that is also another good Best Actress year.
Yes, no, definitely my favorite year of the 2010s.
Listen,
for sure.
Kate
We
Blanchett
got
and Carol.
Right.
Saoirse Ronan, truly luminous in Brooklyn. So, yeah.
I think that's also the problem for me, is that secretly, even though Room is one of the few movies ever to make me cry, I'm just not a crier, I would still rank her as fourth best.
Yeah, that's fair. I was definitely a big fan of Brie Larson at that time, especially having seen Short Term 12 and United States of Terror. And it's like, oh, look at her. She's in this grown-up film and getting all this buzz. And I was happy for her, but I definitely agree in general that there were other options in that category that may have been good. But listen, she's thriving. She's Captain Marvel. She's doing her thing. So she's a video game YouTuber now. So I don't know.
Oh, yeah, right.
There's that.
She's been in like $2 billion movies, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That's like a trivia note that keeps coming up. But anyway, these
she's
aren't movies I would ever see. So who knows?
Of course.
Maybe I just made that up.
Yeah, I don't even know. But let's talk about this year at the Oscars, the 12th Academy Awards. The nominees were truly an all-star lineup. We have Bette Davis for Dark Victory, Irene Dunne for Love Affair, Greta Garbo for Ninotchka, Greer Garson for Goodbye Mr. Chips, and Vivien Leigh for Gone with the Wind, with the winner, of course, being Vivien Leigh. So before we break down these performances individually, I wanted to know if you had any thoughts just about this lineup as a whole and maybe what it sort of represents about 1939, or just any sort of general thoughts you had.
Well, what's interesting is if you, for instance, are somebody who goes on Sporkle and wants to test your knowledge of Best Actress nominees, going back, it's weirdly a lot easier to do the older years because, generally speaking, most of the nominees are all-stars. There are a few here or there that sneak in. That's
one-offs, right?
That are right, exactly. But for the most part, really, you're getting the Greer Garsons year after year. You're getting the Stan Wicks, Rosalind Russells, whomever, and it's so to me it typifies an award show season from around that era. Just that 5 women were fully behind, were invested in their personal lives, were invested in their studio lives, and they're going to be giving us the marquee performances for years to come. So in a way, though it's an extraordinary year for the Oscars, it's also a typical one.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I do think this is very much an all-star lineup in terms of having gone through this chronologically. There are those one-offs that I think we get pretty much every year until now, which is truly like best of the best in terms of like early. We have like Irene Dunne and Greta Garbo, who already got multiple nominations before this. Now we have Vivien Leigh, this exciting new presence, Greer Garson, this exciting new presence, and also Bette Davis, who had already won 2 Oscars. So it's like past, present, and future all kind of mixed into one here, which is what makes this, again, a good sort of finale for this era of Oscars, I would say. Also, I think this is a lineup that does have a pretty clear tier system in general. Like we have the
For
winner
sure.
and then the 2 performances that would have been great winners maybe in a different year, and then 2 that are happy to be there, I mean, are good,
Right.
but probably not quite up to that level. So it's not perfect, I would say, as a lineup, but again, it is really sort of an inflection point between these 2 eras, which I find fascinating.
I think also this probably happens every year, but it's super notable this year. It's a case of a very public, sought after role, and we are aware that other people in the category also wanted that role.
Yes.
So it's interesting to think of like, is Bette Davis like extra pressed this particular year?
Right. Well, we'll maybe get to that. I'm excited to just dive right into these performances. You ready?
I sure am.
All right. Well, we're going in alphabetical order here, which means we are starting big. We're starting with Bette Davis for Dark Victory. Okay, so Yes, here we have Bette Davis continuing to be in her biggest era of influence and quality of roles and just totally capturing the attention of the public and the critics and the industry. This is her third nomination if you don't count the Of Human Bondage write-in vote thing. Then if you do, then it's her fourth. And so there was no real feeling, I don't think, that she was over rewarded enough. She would keep getting these nominations. And this is an interesting part for her, I would say. It's a little more vulnerable, a little more sympathetic than the roles that she was getting nominated for and winning before this. And I was just reading about her really campaigning for this role in terms of really bringing it to Jack Warner and being like, I want to do this. And Jack Warner, of course, being very dismissive. But she's like, hey, I'm a star, so we're going to go ahead and do it. So that's what happened.
And it also has like the star moments. Like it's still Bette Davis storming out of rooms. It's still
Right.
Bette Davis getting up in somebody's face with like a number of like witty rejoinders in a row. And also giving you the melodrama we associated with her up until that point too. So in a way, it's both classic and pushing her career forward.
Right. So very ideal, I'd say, for this point in her career. To get into like a summary of the film, there's a lot going on. Again, very melodramatic, but she's playing a socialite named Judith, who discovers pretty early on that she has some sort of illness. She gets treated by Dr. Steele, played by George Brent, who also falls in love with her, of course, and then discovers that she has a brain tumor and she doesn't have much longer to live. But the people around her sort of decide that it's probably best to not tell her, so that she can sort of live her life, her last few months, somewhat happy. But eventually she does find out, conflict ensues. I mean, I assume you have a take on Bette Davis before we even get into this performance on just what she means in sort of the classic cinema of it all.
Yeah, well, first of all, she's somebody who is so quotable in her everyday life. It actually is confusing because you can literally confuse Bette Davis with some of the classic characters she plays.
Sure.
You know, like when you hear that Bette Davis said literally at some point in her life, I'm the nicest goddamn dame that ever lived. I mean, you're telling me that's not like a Mankiewicz level like contribution to the lexicon? She was so smart, and so, you know, every like 20 years or so you get that Madonna type person who just blankly cruises through authority, who is just like, no, actually I'm running the whole thing. Actually, I have my own ideas. I heard what you said. It's about my ideas though. And so she just is this towering inferno of a person, and she found interesting ways to express that all through her, even just her Oscar-nominated filmography. But you get into like The Virgin Queen and all these other movies too. Like there are other opportunities to be Bette Davis in larger than life ways. Mm-hmm. But I think she may be the reason a lot of us care about old Hollywood specifically, like the utter bullseye for me anyway. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've talked about this before. I tend to gravitate towards actresses like Bette Davis. I also sort of put Jane Fonda in that sort of a mode.
Definitely the same league, yes.
Yeah, just in terms of sort of powerhouse, almost intensity, but still the vulnerability. Also, Glenn Close for me is big for that. So, yeah, absolutely in the tank for Bette here.
Jane Fonda, I think, is specifically what I'm talking about
Yeah.
too. Where it's like the X factor of Jane Fonda, which is, I have literally a poster of her in the China Syndrome in my bathroom. So you're talking to an acolyte here,
Right?
But just like the thing about her is, I feel like she's been accused of being an egotist over the years, but really it's that she doesn't have an ego and just really cares about the thing she cares about.
Yes.
You know, she's like, no.
And how dare
you
she?
should care about this thing too. Yes,
Right.
right. It's like the sincerity is what's actually alienating to people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other discussion with like the Anne Hathaway and everything, but yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what I find interesting about this performance, though, is that, you know, for the first half or so, I would say it's the type of performance that she's given that is very familiar in general. Her being sort of forceful in the life of the party, socialite, kind of like alpha presence, and, you know, someone that you just truly don't want on your bad side sort of thing. And she has that like tempestuous quality that's just really fun to watch from her. But then watching the second half, you really are seeing her doing some new things that by the end of the film, I would say, when she's really leaning into the physicality of what's happened to her, she really is showing the audience something new. And that's the reason why I think, you know, you see the critic reviews of the time and everyone's like, oh my God, she's like outdone herself.
Right. What's interesting for me is that I think this was the first Bette Davis movie I ever saw. I have some weird memory of, I could be wrong, I think this is right, Lily Sobieski on The Tonight Show, who, if you don't remember her media appearances at the time, was 16 or 17 and was very, quote unquote, beyond her years. Like she was a little bit pretentious in a way that I related to as a high schooler.
Sure.
And she was like, oh, you have to see Dark Victory, to Jay Leno. How this came up, I have no idea. God. But wow. I watched it from there. And like as an introduction to Bette Davis, it is kind of like a primer and everything she can do, because there is some humor in it, the vulnerabilities there, like the force of character, as you just said. But after having watched everything else she's done, and I know at the time critics loved the new edge she had, it feels a little underwhelming compared to how, I guess, devastatingly real her other characters are to me now. I'm surprised it didn't hold up for me as much as I thought it would.
Yeah. Well, again, sort of like rewatching this, for so much of it, it did sort of feel samey to me in a way that wasn't that outstanding, but for me, it really was the end that really sort of brought it home for me. Yeah,
the ending I think is definitely the best part, but the movie definitely spends a lot of time with her being like refusing to acknowledge her own health, investigate her own health, and like the bravado with which she does it is pretty static, I would say.
Yeah. And in some respects, it was sort of like watching Jezebel again for a lot of the film, in terms of being like, oh, this sort of Bette Davis bitch role sort of thing, you know, the tempestuous side, and then having to be humbled by it. And so I think it's almost like a similar arc, except I would say in this case, the journey to get there is a little more earned, because I will say in Jezebel, it's sort of like a switch is flipped towards like the 3/4 point, and she's like, oh, I've decided to be nice now.
Right. I think also her relationship with George Brent is well done. Like that's a plot line that I would find melodramatic in an annoying way, generally speaking. Like the doctor-patient thing is just, you know, the oldest trope.
Oh yeah,
lampooned time and again. But the two of those people somehow, I do like it, or I do think there is something specific between them that comes out on the screen. So that's one of the most memorable things about the movie today. And actually her relationship with Geraldine Fitzgerald, I think, is good too.
Yes, absolutely. I think, honestly, though, like anyone she's on screen with, Geraldine or George Brent or Ronald Reagan.
Right. who you forget was like this like proto Jack Nicholson, kind of like the way he sort of sneered on screen. I'm not saying the talent level was there, but there was something in the appeal market there.
Yeah, I guess so. But it's just, for me, it's just no matter what, you just always are watching her, you know, and it really is such a showcase, I think, that I would argue is almost a detriment to the rest of the actors and the rest of the film. For me, it's just sort of a pure actressing showcase.
Yes, right.
Not a whole lot else in general. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of the film itself, but
no, she's in a full sprint throughout much of the movie, even as she's quote unquote dying.
Right.
And by the way, which is not to say she's not watchable. I mean, like, you really, as much as it's a typical Bette Davis performance, I mean, there's no one else who can do melodrama in quite a pugnacious way. And I think that's what remains kind of addicting about the performance, even if it feels like the, you know, arithmetic mean of Bette Davis performances in many ways.
Right. But for me, when it gets to the more vulnerable moments is when I'm really sort of drawn in by what she's doing, because it just feels like for so much of the film, the dominating emotion is just truly like hurt. You know, she's just hurting she doesn't know what's actually going on with her. No one's actually telling her. And then when she does find out, I think she really communicates all of the different mix of emotions so well. Again, with those iconic Bette Davis eyes, it's so evocative for me, and she can truly do it like no one else. I also just love, speaking to sort of the comedy as well, the scene where they're at the restaurant. And,
I was just going to bring up that scene, yeah.
Yes. And she says, I think I'll have an order of prognosis negative, which is like, okay, girl. Yeah.
Some Nora Ephron level scripting there, I think. You know, just like on the nose sarcasm.
Yeah. I love
And
her.
also, I didn't come here to do this, but I want to also give credit to Geraldine Fitzgerald in that scene. Like her reactions to how strident Bette Davis suddenly is being, like her facial reactions are both shocked and she's like putting it together. Like, does she know this whole story yet and stuff? It's like well done, I think.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, it really for me comes down to like the last 20 minutes or so, the physicality. She's almost like crossing her eyes a little bit once she starts to go blind, which maybe sounds like misguided or like bad from a modern perspective, perhaps like maybe an outdated way of portraying a blind person. But I sort of think she makes it work.
Yes, no, it is good, but it is also LOL. I mean, just like a blind person like shuffling to the walls, and it's like it's not really when you're blind, the world doesn't become prop comedy to you, as it sort of does on screen here. But no, she's affecting even in the very final moments when she's like getting up to the bed. The movie slows to a new speed that is unfamiliar to the rest of the film, and that's very effective too.
Yeah, I think she makes it work, and I can imagine a moviegoer in 1939 just being blown away by what she's doing and what the film is doing by the end, as you're saying, how it does shift in that way. And like when she's talking with George Brent at the end and how she can't go with him, and she's just doing everything in her power to not look him in the eyes. The physicality of what she's doing is really powerful, and of course the image at the end of everything becoming blurry for her and she's just lying in bed. It's an effective ending. It's again not the strongest story overall, not the most engaging plot, I would say, for the first 2/3 or so, but she truly brings it home. And this is one of those cases where I'm not always emotionally affected by classic film as much, because there does tend to be a little bit of a remove sometimes, a little bit of an artificiality, not as much of a realism. But in cases like this, I generally have to like sit back and like take in what I just saw.
Yeah, I think also a surprising reveal in this movie is that even though Bette Davis traditionally is so in our face and supposed to be strong and like kind of super heroic, she really communicates fear well.
Oh yeah.
I think, so the moments when she's terrified really stick, and that's when she's, I guess, her most vulnerable. But you're right, it's that turning the vulnerability on a dime, the surprising moments you get it, that I think are just part of the great dichotomy that is her.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, one thing that I'm doing with this show is reading a review or two of what they were saying at the time, just to get a perspective of what they were saying at the time rather than a modern perspective. The New York Times, I wanted to point this out, is very glowing. Very, very glowing.
I think I've read this, yeah.
They said Bette Davis won an Academy Award last year for her performance in Jezebel, a spottily effective film. Now it is more than ever apparent that the award was premature. It should have been deferred until her dark victory came along. So,
what if we read this reviewer's review of Jezebel and it just says we can't see the red dress? That should be. That's the full review.
I mean, we spent
is it even red?
A decent amount of time on the last episode talking about how just like I want to see the red dress. I really do. But yeah. So truly, like, the critics were 1000% behind Bette Davis in many respects. And obviously we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves, but if we don't have a Gone with the Wind, maybe we're looking at Bette Davis winning her third Oscar in I don't even know, 5 or 6 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, it felt doable to me. We'll get to that, but yeah.
Yes. Any other thoughts on Bette before we move on?
Obviously, her Dick Cavett appearances I really enjoy. You got to watch her famous Johnny Carson appearance where she disses Faye Dunaway. If you haven't heard anybody who listens to this, if you're behind on this, I'm simply blown away. But
yes, okay. Well, let's move on to Irene Dunne for Love Affair. So here we have Irene Dunne already getting her 4th Oscar nomination. It's her 3rd in 4 years. So she was really on a hot streak with the Academy. This is certainly more on the dramatic side compared to Theodora Goes Wild and The Awful Truth, both of which I love, for the record. But she's working with Leo McCarey again, who directed her in The Awful Truth, so she gets to sing again. Her contractually obligated singing scenes are here. This is a story that has certainly endured in one form or another over the years, remade into An Affair to Remember, which, inspired the whole Empire State Building thing with Sleepless in Seattle. So, there was also a direct remake of Love Affair with Warren Beatty and Annette Bening. So, yeah.
Katharine Hepburn's final role, correct?
Yes, that's right. So truly a story that has endured through the years. It's like A Star is Born. So Irene Dunne here, she plays Terry, who is a singer, and she meets a French painter played by Charles Boyer. They meet on an ocean liner, and they are both engaged already, but they just have this intense connection, a love affair, if you will. And they decide if after 6 months they haven't really gotten their act together, they're just going to sort of pursue their relationship in New York. And by doing that, they would profess their love on the top of the Empire State Building. So he makes it to the top eventually, but he's just sort of waiting for her. Turns out she was trying to get there too, but she gets hit by a car. Totally paralyzes her, and he thinks that she didn't want to have anything to do with him. But then they have a few more chance encounters, and just, again, high melodrama happening there, especially towards the end. But what do we think of Irene Dunne and this performance from her?
And also, by the way, another concealing of a handicap, or whatever, concealing of a prognosis, etc. So there's something competitive with Dark Victory here.
Yeah.
I think she's just one of those names that's in that pile with like Jean Arthur, or even in some ways Barbara Stanwyck, where it's like, why isn't this a familiar name anymore? Like, she really did the work of being an old movie star. You watch her and there's like a sense of not just fun and great comedy timing, but like sophistication too.
Oh yeah.
Like somebody you want to know. Almost that feeling I get when I watch old episodes of What's My Line? If you've ever seen Arlene Francis on the panel, you're just like, what happened to people like that who were just like super cool and like, like had a light, lovely laugh and enjoyed it and did conversation well. Irene Dunne in this movie, so chic. I don't know how else to put it. You love her dynamic with Charles Boyer. You love that it feels so adult. They are not immature people in any way. There's like a sense of pragmatism about what they're trying to accomplish. And even when the movie runs into melodrama and, he ends up discovering, they run into each other at a theater and they see each other, and you might think it was out of like a soap, the way they like hold the stare for a long time. Yeah. It is so lovely. Yeah. I think it's so, it's like kind of takes your breath away how, I'm sorry to use such a bland word, nice it is.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I have been sort of reading up more on Irene Dunne just to sort of get a sense of, again, she was very popular. She was the star of so many great films and so versatile. But again, it doesn't really have like the fan base of the Katharine Hepburns and the Greta Garbos and everyone for some reason. And the sense I got just from reading things is that like she just had a really nice sort of boring life. not boring like she was dull, just in the sense that like she wasn't going out and like doing these fabulous things. She just was a working actress. She was really good at her job, and that was it.
Right.
Which might describe maybe like it's hard to really like get into like the juiciness of her personal life if she just sort of doesn't really have like an exciting one necessarily, but that doesn't mean she shouldn't have a fan base.
True. I think maybe also something that takes away is, though she looks lovely on screen, there's nothing particularly iconic about looking at Irene Dunne, whereas like Katharine Hepburn, the angles on her face shatter your screen. Bette Davis is all eyes, or Audrey Hepburn is all hairline and eyes. Whereas Irene's in this kind of Greer Garson community of believable adult lady.
Yes. Perhaps a Deborah Carr could be in that.
Yeah, Deborah Carr, precisely. Yes.
Yes. Yes. It's a very specific
to bring it back to Rita Wilson complaining, or to bring it back to Rita Wilson bleeding in Sleepless in Seattle.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I love Irene Dunne, and again, her 2 screwball comedy performances that were nominated, I think that's fantastic. I love whenever a true comedy performance is nominated. We don't get it enough, but she really did, I think, excel in these kinds of heightened world sometimes in terms of like really playing into the wackiness and sort of going into tit for tat with her scene partners. I do think here it's a little less effective in general because she doesn't have as much to do compared to those others there. Or at least the stuff here is a little less engaging to watch for me, but I think she does add a lot of spark to it. I don't know if it's like a fatal flaw of the film itself, but her scenes with Charles Boyer aren't always that interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
They do have decent chemistry, obviously, but I was sort of reading about how they were perceived as like the top romantic pairing at the time. And watching this, I sort of struggled to see exactly where that was coming from in 1939. I sort of feel like maybe the production code maybe prevented some of the sort of like instant lust and sort of connection in the beginning that might have been necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like they give each other like a strong hug in this movie. You know,
might as well just
you're
be a
not seeing
firm
much in the way
handshake.
of electricity. Yeah,
Right.
uh-huh. I guess we had like a gap year between like power couples or something.
Yeah.
You know, we're coming up on Hepburn and Tracy.
Right, exactly. But I would say the standout moment for her is after her accidents happened and she's at the hospital where she's in bed and she's talking about how like marriage would have been so beautiful and she didn't want to keep him waiting, and she's speaking in this very like labored manner. I just think that's one of those rare raw moments that I always like, again, in this era that we don't get enough sometimes, of someone who is just deeply upset about what's happened and how close she was to like finding her happy ever after sort of thing. And now it's just gone and there's no hope for it anymore. At least that's what she thinks at the time.
Right.
And you see glimpses of that like in Theodore Goes Wild and The Awful Truth at the end, where like all the artifice is gone and she's just like raw, and like the bubbly nature of like how she normally acts is just gone, and she's just stripped in a sense. And I don't remember that being like a particularly long scene, that hospital thing, but I just love those little moments where we just sort of push in on that extreme close-up.
And that's also around the time all the kids sing to her in bed. And I'm actually very obsessed with, in old movies, like when something bad happens to a woman, like there always is a moment, or it's actually the point of the film usually. I'm thinking of movies like Blossoms in the Dust or Interrupted Melody, where it's like, she was a wonderful person. You know, like here she is with the children, inspiring them.
Yes.
But at the very end, after that, the final talk with Charles Boyer, another conclusion where the movie slows to a new speed.
Yes.
And it feels like you're in this hyper intimate moment with the two of them. She's so open and vulnerable, and it reminds me of the end of Before Sunset, where like he's trying to leave, he knows he has to leave, and then it just stops. He's like, I'm not leaving, and he stays with her, and that change is just so magic and also like unpretentious, like so something that would actually occur. I don't know. It's like the way a movie can actually capture the magic of two people wanting to know each other. It really happens here.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I do love when it sort of does have those slowed down moments. And actually, if we're going to keep going with the Before series comparison here, I do think like the moment towards the beginning where they go off and they meet like his grandmother, Maria Uspensky.
One of the like, I don't know why they really needed a shoehorn in this movie, but what a good time.
Yeah.
She's just like 1,000,000 years old.
It's cute.
You know, whatever.
Yeah. But like she has this really nice experience where she's like playing the piano and Irene Dunne is singing, and they just have like this surprisingly like meaningful connection, and she gives her this hug. Like, wow, what like a deeply moving spiritual experience I just had.
Yeah, kind of on accident. Like she's like, well, just enjoying the whimsy of her life in that moment, and
right,
the sudden meaningfulness of their connection.
Yes, that's fun. Yeah, but I do think she is probably best in show here. Again, to bring it back to the like Bette Davis, for me it's just like all about Irene Dunne. I know that Charles Boyer is there too, and he's sort of a co-lead, but like it's all about her for me. And one aspect that I do like about this story is that she does have a life and a career outside of him,
Yes.
that she's thriving. Like, she's very successful. She's not very successful, but she's booked at least. She's a great singer. And again, she gets to display that a few times here. And then, even after the accident, it's not like everything's over now that she's just paralyzed forever and like that she has to give up everything. Like, she does find these kids that she can teach. She just finds like this new passion that's different from just the regular type of thing we would get of like, I'm just totally consumed by the affair that I might have had with Charles Boyer, and now I can't think about anything else. I just like that it seems like
an
she's
actual adult decision.
Yeah.
She moved on with her life in some way.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is, does she get 3 full numbers in this? Like, I think that's right? Because she has the thing with Maria Spinskaya, she has the song later on, and then the thing with the kids.
Yeah.
I mean, this movie is not long. And it feels like it goes
clean
all over the
90
place
minutes.
too.
Yeah.
So it's almost shocking that they can get all of this in, because it's not a movie that is rushed either.
Right.
So it's strange that they get it all in.
Yeah. For me, it sort of does suffer sometimes from a very odd problem of being 90 minutes, but also sort of dragging in some parts where it feels it's a little longer than that. But yeah, especially like the middle, we get like 1 or 2 scenes of her and 1 or 2 scenes of him, and then the accident happens. It's strange to really say that you want a film to be longer, especially obviously in like our current day of movies truly being too long.
Right.
But in this time, I do think like maybe some more development of them separately maybe would have made the ending even more impactful for me.
Mm-hmm. But like as an old romance goes, I would say this is a little underrated. I mean, I think during the 30s, we only really think about Gone with the Wind and It Happened One Night as sort of like timeless. And like for the most part, I do find this generally timeless,
It is, yeah. So that's Irene Dunne. Variety. This isn't like exactly a rave or anything, but just mentioned that Irene Dunne is excellent in a role that requires both comedy and dramatic ability. I mean, pretty standard, but
right.
True.
A good first line of the Wikipedia on this
right.
compliment.
But it does
standard.
It is a testament, I think, to her versatility that she really could do comedy and drama pretty seamlessly, and like one of those performers who could just in one scene do the thing where she's like making you laugh and then by the end she's making you cry.
Right. Somebody I might compare her to is Kristen Wiig, in that and she never goes as broad as Kristen Wiig,
right.
But like the comedy can be undercut by like oh shucks kind of like melancholia, in a sweet way.
I like that a lot. And again, as someone that has like a regular normal life, Kristen Wiig.
Yeah, right.
So there you go.
Like somebody you believe is somebody you would meet on the street, correct?
Right, exactly. All right, anything else on Irene Dunne?
Watch all her. I mean, it's the case of somebody whose Oscar-nominated movies just should be watched. Definitely watch Theodora Goes Wild. Definitely watch The Awful Truth.
Yeah, I think a lot of people...
I remember Mama, probably her worst movie, but I have to say the Barbara Bel Geddes scene, not a nomination she deserved, actually does make me cry, though. Actually does make me cry.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get to it. I'm sad that we're almost done with Irene Dunne already, but...
I know. That's tough.
Yes, I think people have seen a lot of people have seen The Awful Truth, but I truly do recommend Theodora Goes Wild, which is truly unhinged, very fun. Yes, okay. Well, let's move on to a big one here. Greta Garbo for Ninotchka. We've arrived at the final Greta Garbo nominated performance and her second to last performance in general overall. So, just like we talked about Norma Shearer and Marie Antoinette last week, we are at the end of an era with one of the true icons of early cinema. And here we certainly see her being looser, having more fun. I'm curious to know your thoughts again on Greta Garbo, the legend, the actress, the glamour, the Greta Garbo standoff size.
Right.
All of it.
Kicking off the Vogue rap. I mean, she's, in the batting lineup, she comes out first. That means you both can do the job and you're a star, right?
Yes.
That's the only sports metaphor I'll make the entire time I'm here. Well, in a way now it's her signature performance, because I want to say on the like AFI top 100 movies or comedies list or whatever, like Ninotchka's the movie you would see, you know.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of lines in it that do hold up, and like a contempt, like the jokes about capitalism, the jokes about fewer and better Russians, like lots of funny stuff going on. I do think as a photography subject, she is most compelling. I like her most that way.
Okay.
My question about Ninotchka is, even though her transformation is, I hate using just words like effective, that sounds so bland, but like you're wrapped up in her. She has a specific, seemingly dead spirit that wakes up and then like finally gives way to some cackling and gives way to some laughter and some lightness.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's a miraculously skilled performance. I feel like the way in which she dispenses deadpan humor is sometimes good, but always the same.
Yes. I really enjoy this performance. I do think possibly some of it is sort of just the novelty of...
Correct. That's what it is. The juxtaposition of who she is with what this role is and what we get out of her is a lot of fun.
Yes. So just, I think, for context, the last time I talked about her was 2 episodes ago with Camille, and she made Conquest the following year, which was a total failure at the box office, and she was labeled box office poison. So...
Like everybody. There's not one person who wasn't named box office poison
Catherine
besides
Hepburn.
like John Wayne. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, she made Ninotchka to do something different, and the studio certainly was hoping for it to be a big comeback for her. Worked out pretty well. It was a success critically and in terms of box office. So she's playing the titular role of Ninotchka, which she is a Soviet envoy, and she's sent to Paris to get to the bottom of a situation where there's these other Russian agents that haven't been able to sell like a piece of jewelry that was taken from the Russian aristocracy. Like it's sort of like a sweaty setup, I would say.
The MacGuffinest MacGuffin.
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But she ends up meeting this guy, Leon, played by Melvin Douglas.
Whom we love. We all fucking love HUD, right? What a performance.
Yes.
Great win.
Yes. Very different kind of performance here. But he is having like a romance with the woman whose jewelry was being sold, I guess. So they're sort of on opposite sides of the whole deal. But then they develop this connection and they end up falling in love. And part of that is involving her, opening up more and letting loose.
The movie really could have been called Smile More. I mean, seriously.
Yes, that is...
like, the thrust of the movie is, can you believe this ice-cold woman could end up enjoying herself? And look how much more fun she's having now that she's pleasing men. You know?
Yes, true. But also there's part of it, too, I think, that is portraying, like, communism and this sort of the Russian sentiment as being drab, you know, and how it, like, doesn't really work. And, like, maybe this capitalism thing isn't so bad.
Right. I'm loving it. Yeah.
Yes. Keeping in mind that the world we're in at the time is like the threat of Nazis and World War II. So I'd say this is kind of an attempt, however sort of romantic and fun it is, to really just sort of poke fun at communism.
Totally, yes. But generally pretty benign.
Yeah, exactly. I do love that, number one, she just agreed to this role to begin with, considering it really feels like such a meta role that isn't necessarily like self-parody necessarily, but really playing with people's expectations of her. And then I also do love, again, that the Academy acknowledged her in this more comedic role. Again, always an advocate for comedy performances. And in the first third of the film, we see her very serious, very unfeeling, severe, sort of playing into stereotype of like the cold Russian agent type of thing. But then also, I think playing into like her own reputation almost, in terms of like being antisocial and not really wanting to really schmooze with people and just being like very severe and like totally about her work and not wanting to play the game. And I just feel like an audience in 1939 watching this and having all of the baggage of Greta Garbo in their mind, that watching this is like truly, again, going back to it, a novelty, and just truly like, wow, she's really like poking fun at herself almost.
Right, and before she even gets to poking fun at herself, like she really is unforgiving to this guy. You know, like it's like really leaning into the "I am the coldest living person" thing. It goes on for a while. Like it's not 10 minutes into the movie she's riotously laughing. It's probably something like 30 or 40 maybe. I don't know. Yeah. But you get a real slice of classic "Don't fucking touch me" Greta Garbo. So once she finally does give way a little bit, it is a lot of fun, but I do feel like the novelty of that is particular to that moment, and the rest of the movie I'm not as obsessed with.
That's fair. She does have a lot of great deadpan lines though in the beginning, where the one that I enjoy
that's all the funniest lines,
right, is when she's like, "Must you flirt?" and he just says, "Well, I don't have to, I just find it natural," and she's like, "Suppress it," just with like not even missing a beat. Just really good comedic timing, which is something that you wouldn't normally say about a Greta Garbo performance. Great comedic timing, but obviously the big part of the advertising of this is Garbo laughs, which is, part of a play on the advertising of her first sound film, Anna Christie, being Garbo Talks.
Right.
And obviously we have that scene that is the transition point of the whole film, where she's finally opening up and having fun, and he's desperately trying to make her laugh, desperately trying to make her smile at least. And just nothing is working. And I just love how she just sort of like shakes her head and is just like, I'm not amused by any of this.
And getting grimmer and grimmer as he fucks up a joke. And actually, the way he messes up the jokes is pretty funny too. I have to give some credit to Melvin Douglas there.
Right. And then, of course, the moment where he falls out of his chair, she finally breaks. And I think maybe her laughing is a little overdone. I'll just say that. I think it's a little like, oh, this is too much almost.
Like she's definitely throwing her head back suddenly. Like she's never laughed once before, and she's discovering this new sensation.
Yes, like, what is happening to me? Sort of thing. Yeah. But I like also the very dramatic scene of her putting on one of those stylish hats from the 30s. Where she's like in the mirror.
Oh, right, the pointy hats.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That like Bette Davis wore to present an Oscar in like 1950, that kind of cone-looking thing.
Yes, sort of a Irene Dunne in The Awful Truth sort of thing.
Yes, very much that. Yes.
Yeah. And just sort of like looking in the mirror and seeing if she can make it work, and she just sort of like grimaces. It's fun.
Yeah. A little bit of a Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman sort of dress-up moment, if you want a contemporary reference. And of course, they're comparable in talent, too.
Oh, of course. When the GG is right there, right?
Yeah, right. It speaks for itself.
Yes.
No, but I, to me, the best thing about this movie are the written jokes. That, to me, is what holds up the best. And while I like the nature of her deadpan performance, I really think it is wrapped up in the irony of who she is and not... Yeah. I don't think you would ever say it's the best deadpan performance I've ever seen. Just a fun one.
Yeah, but I love when she like is trying the champagne for the first time, and she's kind of like a little bit disgusted at first, but then she just like lights up and she's like, "It's good."
And he says the hangover is worth it, like training her to become a traditional alcoholic.
Right. But I feel like a scene like that is a little more effective for me than like the big Garbo laugh scene, because I think her energy is just really infectious, and you just see the absolute delight on her face, which you wouldn't see in pretty much any other film she made. So it does kind of make me want to see what she could have done with a different comedy performance moving forward, if this was like the kickoff of a new phase of her career where she did do comedies. Like, would she just sort of play it more the same, or I don't know. I think she could be fun.
And she was retired within like 5 years after this, wasn't she?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
which is really interesting, because it does feel like it should be opening a new chapter for her, as you said. But, it's weird. It's baffling to place that in time as, this is near the very end.
Yeah. Right. It really does feel like it should be kicking off like a fabulous career in the 40s of doing like romantic, like almost like Philadelphia Story kind of films.
Mm-hmm.
But she's Greta Garbo. She was like, I'm done. bye. I don't care that this like was a big successful hit critically and box office wise. Like, I'm done. That's my swan song. Bye.
It feels like that should have been Marlene Dietrich, who seemed way more ambivalent about the movies she made, but then we got so much more out of her.
Exactly. But yeah, I think the sort of fun and the novelty of her just opening up starts to wear off, I would say, as the film goes on, where it's like actually delving into the plot with the jewelry and like her going back to Russia and really missing Paris and missing Melvin Douglas and everything. It's really trending more into literally everything I've already seen before from a Greta Garbo film.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun while it lasted, though.
Yeah. There's one thing that I do tend to find by the end of a lot of Greta Garbo films, which is I just sort of feel exhausted.
Wow. Go on.
It's just there's such a gloominess sometimes with her performances that I'm just like, I'm sorry, like, take a nap. Like, I don't know what you want. It's just like, it's so heavy what she's being asked to do in a lot of her films. And sort of like the tortured, I'm impossibly beautiful and rich, and yet I'm miserable sort of thing.
Right.
That's just
I do find myself lost in the like graph paper perfection of her face, though. Like a part of you can almost zone out and just be like, obviously she's done up to look drab in this movie, but at the same time, like, there's just something perplexing. I would compare it a little bit to Angelica Houston in that there are a lot of things on her face that shouldn't go together, like the size of her nose, the jaw, like the length of her eyes, and yet together it's like, I've never seen anybody look like this before. It's so shocking altogether how much it like quote unquote works.
Yeah. And then to have the voice on top of that, which is so
right.
striking.
And yes, fabulous voice.
Right. But I'll say this, I do find myself more invested in this story. I mean, her and Melvin Douglas, I think, are decent together. It's not like a grand romance for the ages by any means, but there's just a light touch to it that Ernst Lubitsch, the director, certainly specialized in. Just a very lively energy, I would say, like a certain musicality that is really fun to have combined with all due respect, one of the more dour movie stars that we've ever had. So
I think she would be flattered by that.
Yeah. I think she'd be like, yeah.
The only kind of respect there is a dour kind of respect to Greta Garbo, I believe.
I think so. Yeah. So that's pretty much what I've got on Greta Garbo. There was this good review from New York Times, which said, "It must be monotonous, this superb rightness of Garbo's playing. We almost wish she would handle a scene badly once in a while, just to provide us with an opportunity to show we are not a member of a fan club."
Wow, this guy like supplicating at her feet. Just
yes. It's a lot.
Mama can't even help how perfect she is. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm telling you, I'm sure you've read reviews of this time period. Truly the most hyperbolic.
Oh
things.
God, right.
Yeah.
You could just picture them in kind of like swimmy font appearing on the screen with like exclamation points.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else on Greta?
Lots holds up about the movie. I think I'm not going to say lovely. I think she is often funny in it. Yeah. I don't think she is a superb actor. I think that the irony in which she was cast is more notable than what's in the performance.
Yes. Perhaps this is more of a writing achievement than a performing achievement, you might say.
Yes. I think so.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to our final losing nominee, Greer Garson, for Goodbye, Mr. Chips. So, we have come to an actress that I'm going to be talking a lot about in the next season, in the 40s. She was a huge favorite of the Academies from the very start, with Goodbye, Mr. Chips actually being her first film. So, just to introduce her a little bit, she had been on stage, and I guess she made like a very early TV appearance even in Britain for a production of Twelfth Night. And Louis B. Mayer discovered her and signed her to MGM, and the rest is sort of history. So
and she spent a couple years not taking roles, waiting for something rad enough for her to roll along, and that's what she took here, which interesting choice, but okay.
Right. Don't know how rad this is, per se, but yes. So Goodbye, Mr. Chips. It is about a teacher who's a little bit shy, played by Robert Donat, and he takes a trip with his colleague to Austria, where he ends up meeting Kathy Ellis, who is a young woman, a suffragette, played by Greer Garson here. And she's quite a bit younger than him, but they do develop a quick connection together, and they decide to get married. And she sort of gets involved with the school with him and isn't really in the film for very long after that.
No, her next major life achievement is dying.
Yes. And that's not really a spoiler, I would say. It happens
happens
very old
very
film.
early on. Yeah.
But it's truly like, yeah, exactly. But this is another film and a performance here that, to borrow a term from the Great Blank Check podcast, is very much, what if there was a wife? You know, that is
so true.
This performance, which
it's also like, not only, as almost anybody who watches this movie would say, clearly a supporting performance.
Yes.
It is also the prototype of a nominated supporting performance.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that this person appears, has like a glimmer of a personality. We're enchanted by her for a moment. The main character is enchanted by her for a moment.
Yeah.
She's inspirationally vulnerable for a moment and then dies. I mean, truly, that is like, is that not Rayon in Dallas Buyers Club? Is that, not like so much like, that glimmer sparkle of a person, and they're gone,
Right. True. Truly. Yeah. And it's truly like one of those performances where they're very much defined by their relationship to her husband, her boyfriend, whatever the case may be, whatever this type is. They might have a few interests outside of this relationship, but mostly it's about that dynamic, and usually lopsided in favor of the male lead. And I think I've made it clear when I was doing the Best Picture series that I was not the biggest fan of Greer Garson.
I would describe Greer Garson as nobody's favorite.
Well, I have a few friends who are like secret.
You can cut
Greer
those
Garson
friends.
people. Oh wow, okay. Well, some
It's
of
over
them have
now.
appeared on this very show, so
All right, well, it's a fight now.
we'll see how they feel about that. But
This certainly would not be their favorite Greer Garson entry.
I
of
would
course,
hope
though.
not. Yes, but I don't know. I just sort of find her fine, and that's about it in most of her performances. I think she's great in Mrs. Miniver. I think that's a great role for her, and I'm glad she won for it. Otherwise, I don't know. I'm sort of feel like I'm missing something. Maybe when I'm rewatching these, I will finally understand the Greer Garson appeal. But
No, her whole thing is like a vaguely sophisticated lady.
Noble.
Like the whole
Yeah.
thing of like, we need a lady for this role, so she's
Yes.
going to fill that.
stiff upper lip.
Yeah, beyond
Yes.
that, like, again, it's like Irene Dunne gives you that and some in what she does, like plus
Exactly.
comedy, plus
Yes.
more vulnerability, So she
Yes.
feels a little bit just like the cutout of somebody who belongs in a role like that. I agree, Mrs. Miniver, she's great. Probably not my favorite performance is Mrs. Miniver, honestly. So I don't know.
Fair enough. Yeah. But I don't know. Maybe it's sort of like Norma Shearer's career died, and now here comes Greer Garson sort of feeling for me.
Yeah, right.
But-
I was just thinking about Norma Shearer because, of course, she was up for the role of, or she had been announced as Scarlett O'Hara at one point and then had to apologize because people were so angry, which is so funny.
Yes.
I mean,
Her fans
she's
were
such a, like,
incensed.
I enjoy Norma Shearer. To express
Yeah.
rancor her way feels very funny.
Yes, we don't want you to be mean, Norma.
Yeah.
That was sort of the sense that we got from the fans. More on that later. But yeah, she sort of arrives, Greer Garson, like 40 minutes into the film, I would say. They meet when they're mountain climbing,
Which makes no sense. She's lounging on what looks like Kilimanjaro,
yes,
like way up in the air.
it's hanging out. I'll say this. It's not your standard meet cute situation, so I give it credit for being different. Let's just say that.
I mean, they certainly did meet on a mountain, if that's what you mean.
Yes, the mountains between us, truly.
Yeah. Fine film.
Yes.
But I guess her signature moment in the movie, when the thing that probably earned her a nomination is before her death, which, by the way, occurs so quickly and with so little fanfare, like a nurse
And
shuts the door
off-screen.
and yells, "She's dead" or something. It's like that's what occurs.
Yeah.
She says to Chips, who I don't believe at this point really needs the inspiration, like,
Yeah.
you, Chips, can do whatever you want. It's like, yes, of course he can.
I think he
she's
knew
here to like
that.
reiterate the sentiment of the movie. It's
Right.
It's almost everything she brings. You kind of could have subtracted from the movie. Like it almost doesn't need a romance.
Yeah. I have a friend, Joey Gentili, who says that when it comes to lead and supporting performances, if you can basically take them out of the film and it wouldn't really alter things too much, then they are absolutely supporting.
Yeah, right.
And I sort of feel like that's the case here. I agree. But as far as just her acting, I think, this is her first film and she seems pretty relaxed in front of the camera. I'll give her that. Just seems already
a comfortable presence.
Yeah.
Nothing like
Warm.
wrong about her in the part or
Right.
weird, but also not anything. It just is somebody to fill the silhouette they needed. The vaguely-ish, the blondish, adultish woman they needed.
Right. Yeah, I don't think there's any way you can really justify this being a lead actress nomination type of performance. And it does put her at such an unfair disadvantage among this lineup, where you also have Vivien Leigh, who still has the most amount of screen time that has ever been nominated for any of the 4 acting categories in Oscar history, in it for like over 2 hours. And you compare that to Greer Garson and 21 minutes. So...
Right, which I'm actually even surprised it's that long.
Seems high, I was going to say.
Yeah. Yeah, what was she doing? Does she have a number? What happens for 4 of those minutes?
Yeah, I know. I do think also it's kind of a strangely written character. I guess barely written character, but she's like a suffragette. That's how she's introduced. Right. She likes to like go around on bicycles, I guess, and it feels like she's like this independent woman in the beginning as she's introduced, but then like when she's talking to Chips, she's saying like she likes her men to be old-fashioned, and like for the rest of the film pretty much her entire life just revolves around him and doesn't seem to have any interest in anything else.
Right, she sees something in him. That's the point of this character, correct?
Yes. But I'm just like I'm looking at how she's introduced and what she actually does, and they're completely opposite to me.
Yeah, right. I had forgotten, though, that, like, the bicycle was the main form of suffragette-esque liberation at the time that this part of the story takes place. So that at least makes sense historically to me, but otherwise, it's not like she's given anything real to do that gets us invested in her as a character in this story. Right.
And she's, like, having a tea party at her house for Christmas and putting up the decorations, and she like helps the students vaguely, I guess, maybe. I don't really know, but she's around the students, she's helping the students. I don't really know what she's actually doing, but
it makes me feel bad for like saying Felicity Jones shouldn't have been nominated for the wife role, because she does like 25 times what Greer Garson does in this movie.
That's fair. Right. And is actually the lead of her film, to be clear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
couldn't subtract her, correct. Yeah.
Right. But it's definitely taking like that more housewife role, which I'm not saying that you can't do those things and also be like a suffragette, obviously, and have some kind of like an independent spirit, but it just feels very contradictory. And I don't know, I think if the film did dwell on her a little bit more, that maybe she could have been a compelling character. I don't really know also how much she herself is really elevating things beyond what it is.
No, I think she's playing what's on the page fairly. Yeah. But I nowadays, if this were made and she had this much screen time, it would feel to me like they cut a lot of her out. Like there must have been a whole other storyline we didn't know about or something that ended up on the cutting room floor. Because it is quite strange. I was going to say, pardon me. Damn it. Go ahead. I lost my train of thought. Yeah.
Well, my question actually, do you think that this is a nomination-worthy supporting actress performance?
Oh, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it had to have been so insulting to like Merle Oberon or, somebody who's like was at least there in the film
Yeah.
Nomination for supporting.
Hmm.
It would be on the cusp for me. I mean, well, this year in particular, it's pretty hard.
Yeah.
But you got Uspinskaya in there, who
Listen.
is a delight.
She is.
Delight.
I love a fun old lady having fun in a supporting category.
And then
Judi Dench
weeping
and
basically
Chocolat.
at nothing. Yes, right. But yeah, she's up against Hattie and Olivia, and Drums Along the Mohawk is the other one, right? Edna Mae Oliver.
Yes, who I love, by the way.
Yeah, that's
I'm never
that's
going
a
to be
good
able to talk
nomination.
about her, but she's great.
That's
Yeah.
So I guess my answer is almost no.
Yeah. And listen, we have like an unnominated Margaret Hamilton in The Wizard of Oz. Like,
Right.
the competition
yes, exactly.
is tough. But yeah, she dies, and that's it. Like, I basically just tuned out of the rest of this rewatch, to be honest, because I didn't really need to even, like, what else is there to even say? They barely even mention her after she dies, so.
And also, by the way, he doesn't have that much to mention. He really is just nice
No.
man.
I know. Yeah.
I appreciated Robert Donat's comments about the character, because like it's one of these wins where he's aged up and down a lot, which I'm sure is part of, like, what's his name, Joseph Schildkraut winning for Life of Emile Zola. It's like, is it because he was old for 3 minutes? Like, that's why we gave it to him? And what's his name, Robert Donat said that he said he looked like a drowned sheepdog for some of this movie, or he compared himself to a dog, but it was really funny.
Yeah. We love that brutal honesty. Yeah, so I don't know, even like the ending for her, it's like we don't even see, because isn't she pregnant? Like, she's going to have a baby, and
Right.
the baby also dies in childbirth.
Oh yeah, the nurse is like, they're like both dead or whatever she says. Like,
yeah.
and then walks down the stairs to do what? No idea.
Yeah, right. But it's all off screen. I'm not saying like I needed to see something in graphic detail by any means, but she doesn't even really have like the opportunity to have like a big climactic scene like that, you know, like of seeing how she is like confronting her own mortality or something. So I just sort of leave the film shrugging, like, great, that's that.
Fine. Yes.
Yeah. So sadly, that's all we have, I guess, for this first Greer Garson performance.
I believe we over-delivered, frankly. So
Yeah, I tried to stretch it out for as much equal time with the rest as I could, but that's literally all we can even say.
She didn't. Yeah, right. So
Exactly. I did want to read this a little bit long. It's like a paragraph thing from New York Times, which is really another doozy of a review here. They said, Miss Garson's Catherine, the assertive young woman who changed the dour Mr. Chipping into the lovable Mr. Chips, is altogether believable and quite entrancing. Mr. Hilton, who wrote the novel of Goodbye, Mr. Chips, deserves no credit for her at all. He simply said that she was captivating and lively, that she soon had Chips, the boys, and the masters worshipping at her feet. Authors have a habit of inventing people like that, merely saying they are so-and-so and not bothering to prove it. But Miss Garson managed to fit the bill. More, to make it seem to do her an injustice. Her Catherine is one of the nicest people we would hope to meet anywhere. When she dies, we hate to have the picture continue without her.
oh my God,
So,
the bravery of making a
lot
nice
to unpack
lady
there.
for the screen. Yes. Oh, what a relief that she was so nice to the man.
Yes. We love that nice lady in the film. So, great.
Sounds like somebody who really has a lot of close female friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Finally,
Not
someone
at all
come around.
bewildered by women on a daily basis. Yeah.
Right. See, here's this woman that you can look up to, ladies. Yes.
Dear me, she really is an adult. Wow. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
it's so funny.
We love this adult woman. Here we go, folks. Here's our winner, Vivien Leigh, Gone with the Wind. Truly, we have saved the biggest and grandest for last here. Again, remains to this day the longest performance to ever even be nominated for an Oscar, let alone Best Actress.
And by the way, that's not an invitation to beat that. This should remain the longest. Yes.
Yes, thank you. But yeah, 2 hours and 23 minutes on screen.
Do you ever, you know how people like love like being horrified, like they go on roller coasters or whatever, buy like a crazy motorcycle or something. Do you know what I do to horrify myself? Watch the tryouts for Scarlett O'Hara and remember how fucking close Paulette Goddard got to winning this movie.
Yeah.
What, guys, the timeline that's on is so haunted and so bad. Like I became violent towards Paulette Goddard watching her audition for this role. The legendary search for Scarlett O'Hara, necessarily went on as long as it did so that they could find someone as good as Vivien Leigh. But man, It is so crazy how people all wanted this role and like seemingly none of them got it. That you had to be an ass. You have to be like so dogged and so self-possessed in your ugly character that it comes off in every scene and every tryout, save maybe the aforementioned Jean Arthur. Completely off the mark. It's so interesting how people didn't get it.
Right. And again, we're talking about some of the true greats, some Best Actress winners even.
Yeah, Betty was certainly in the conversations we mentioned before. Katharine Hepburn, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And it was genuinely the most sought after part in like the history of Hollywood at this point. I don't think it's even been topped, I would say.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that was the apex, you're right.
Over like 1,400 women were interviewed for the part, at least. Not necessarily making it to like, if it's like an American Idol comparison, like they didn't really make it to Hollywood in this case. But, I think like 30 people tested for it. And yeah, like all stars, I guess, including Katharine Hepburn, Irene Dunne, Bette Davis, Janet Gaynor even, Barbara Stanwyck.
Of course.
And yeah, Jean Arthur, Lana Turner, Susan Hayward. I mean, again, past and future here.
I had forgotten what Susan Hayward's name was at the time. It was different than Susan Hayward, but
yes,
it was a very young Susan Hayward.
Yeah, and apparently the whole thing with Paulette Goddard is like she had troubles with her husband Charlie Chaplin, and that sort of overshadowed things in a way that made them go to Vivien Leigh instead. That was part of it. If
you watch the tryout or one of the color screen tests she does, I think it's George Cukor, says to her, Paulette, your face is so hard right now. When I think of this often, what does that mean? Your face is so hard right now. And she's like, oh, of course. And then does her best to soften it, whatever that means.
Being a woman in Hollywood.
Right.
All right. Yes.
And that was a woman's director, like the woman's director.
That's
so
true.
Interesting.
But yeah, so Vivien Leigh here, she was a British actress. She was classically trained, stage, the whole works. But really didn't have like a huge presence in Hollywood before this. So was really kind of like, this is an introduction to the world kind of a role. And there was some controversy with her being British. But I would say that you can't even really detect the accent with this performance, at least.
No, I've seen some fanzine vote-ins like about how like it was like 3% support this British woman coming in to play this role, and everybody else thinks she should be tossed to wolves. And it just makes you think again about, guys, the public doesn't know what they need. We need to be told to stop trusting us. Stop trusting us losers out here.
We really don't know what we're talking about here. So
no.
Do I need to really get into like the plot of Gone with the Wind? People know Scarlett O'Hara. They know the whole deal. They know all the quotes. They know the racism. They know the controversy.
Right.
Yeah.
And that it was protested at the time too. But,
that is true. Good point.
I always think it's interesting, like whatever. Why were we talking about Gone with the Wind a couple years ago? Oh, because it was on HBO Max and they used it in the advertising for HBO Max or something. And then people thought, well, this is a classically racist movie. Why is this the marquee attraction of HBO Max? Right. Anyway, that was a debate that went back to the Margaret Mitchell book. And I do think, by the way, it's also funny. Like, it's not that you have to dive into this movie to get into the racism of the Old South or whatever. The opening crawl literally is like, the Old South was the best. Men were men, women were women, slaves loved what they did. I mean, it's just like the phrase "gone with the wind" means what is gone exactly? How great the South was. So.
Yes. Wasn't it so much simpler and nicer back then when there was overt racism and all that? It was just men were men. It was truly like All in the Family, theme song.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway, not to get away from Vivien, but
yes.
something that is, I think, fascinating about this particular year is that literally every compliment you can level at the 4 competing performances you can say about this performance. Like the bleak humor of Ninotchka is totally in Scarlett O'Hara. The romance of love affair you get in Gone with the Wind. Like the melodrama of Dark Victory, totally in. I mean, it's like it literally is like if you multiplied the other 4 performances together, what you get in Gone with the Wind.
Pretty much, yeah. And like the vague appearance of Greer Garson, I guess. I don't really know what the comparison is for her, but
oh yeah. Well, there's some romance there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But I mean,
she's not encouraging to any man, as far as I remember. But yeah.
Right. True. That's decidedly not the case. But this is an iconic performance, as we all know. What are your thoughts on this performance? Because like this is one that people have said is possibly the best actress win of all time. Do you have thoughts on that?
A completely fair analysis, I think, just based on the sheer amount of dimensions you get in a character. That also, by the way, you never feel like she's ever expressing just one of those at a time. I feel like the cold, ambitious character that is apparent in everything she does, and as huge as the movie is, as huge as the spectacle is, as epic as the situation she's in is, and some of these shots, which are of course unbelievable to watch, what she brings is equally as big the whole time. Literally, it's like they're jutting together, the hugeness of the movie and the hugeness of her performance. She's never ever dwarfed by it. Even just sometimes, like when she's not talking, you're looking at the look on her face and whether it's disgust or like contempt or any of the fun bastardly things that she can convey on her face. It's always like watchable and a hoot. I mean, truly, maybe Scarlett O'Hara is my favorite comedian. She is so funny. She is so funny.
She is. She is on it. She is observing the people around her, and she has comments, and she's just ready to go. Yeah. I mean, this is one of those performances for me that it's not so much about like plucking out a scene or two and saying like, look at this. This is her Oscar scene. This is where she won the Oscar. It's one of those performances where like the whole film is the showcase in its totality, I would say. It's such a complete
you would never say like, oh, she got the Oscar because of that one scene. You would never say that.
Right. It's just like from beginning to end a complete performance, and it's one of these things where I look at it and I'm like, A+. I have no notes. Like
right. No, as in like you can hardly imagine what it was like to behold it at the time. Even just like the way in which she's funny. And by the way, this applies to Mammy too, to Hattie McDaniel. This is, for instance, like years before the sitcom is invented, and Mammy is like so funny in a way that belongs on like modern sitcoms. Like, could people even believe what they were seeing? It's so crazy. One moment I'll shout out that I love that I feel is underdiscussed is when Scarlett kills the Yankee on the stairs, and then she goes, I guess I did murder. And then she's like, I won't think about it now. I'll think about it tomorrow. It's so like I'll say Fleabag, the way she's like dismissive about this like very like black subject.
Right. And really sort of like throwing away her lines in a way that you really wouldn't see in like this grand melodramatic kind of performance of this era by any means. So
subtle. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, to bring it back to like starting with the accent work, I hate to admit that it took far too long for me to actually learn that Vivien Leigh was not in fact from the South. Like, wow. Just like growing up and like watching these two iconic performances, her and Streetcar, obviously, it's just like, oh, this is like the Southern Belle lady. That's sort of how I knew her. And it wasn't until like, I don't know when it was, but finally learning more about her that I'm like, wow, she truly did transform for both of those performances. But even like the body language, like I said, just the privilege that she sort of exudes from beginning to end truly is so fun. Like, I'm hot shit. I know that I'm hot shit, and you're just gonna have to deal with that I'm hot shit. Like
the self-possession, I answer to me. I know how things are, and I know how I interact with them, and I get what I want. And even as we're describing it, I noticed you just now, it's like you want to laugh. It's so, she's so abominable. And so,
Yeah.
Sure. And yet it's all apparent. I feel bad even describing it because you just have to watch the movie and be in it and like wrap yourself in it and feel devilish the entire time she's running the show and like accidentally tumbling towards virtue and still not getting it.
Right. Yeah, and that's why she's such a fascinating protagonist, especially at this time where, like, yes, we have the Bette Davis roles that verge into being unlikable, quote unquote, but it was rare, you know, especially in a big production like this. And I just feel like she was the perfect choice in so many ways. When I think about all the other actresses that could have played this part, like truly, I feel like I know what I would be getting into if it's like Katharine Hepburn, Irene Dunne, Norma Shearer, Bette Davis, even. Like, I feel like I can envision what those performances would be, and I feel like it would just feel like more the actress and their persona that they naturally bring to most roles, rather than what Vivien Leigh does just as this actress who moviegoers in America at least just had no expectations about, other than the fact that she was British and, you know, again, the controversy there, but she really didn't have like a thing, you know, there wasn't a Vivien Leigh thing that you could sort of hang your hat on to be like, oh, I know what to expect from this performance. And I think that's another aspect of why it was so smart to cast her here.
To say nothing
I don't see Vivien Leigh, I see Scarlett O'Hara, basically.
Yes, totally. To say nothing of how just bewitching her various glances are. Just like she'll appear in a scene and you're like, I can't believe somebody can look this amazing. Just that she would fulfill every quadrant of like movie star plus actress plus believable Southerner plus, you know, just it's so mind-boggling. Like how could they get it so right? It's, you know, how could she get it so right? How could she seem so unnervous? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm thinking in the beginning where she's like looking at Mammy out of the corner of her eye, sort of, just like with this like sense of menace almost.
Her relationship with, also it's like obviously like the relationship with the slaves. I mean, that deserves a whole different conversation, but like the way in which she is dismissive and heeds what Mammy says, I think is something she adds to the role. Like the like fuck off and also okay. Like she's, it's like she takes what is valuable to her from every person, takes what is valuable to her from every person. And Mammy has more of those moments than other characters do.
Yeah. Which feels,
there's also,
again,
there's additional racism
modern
in the fact that this is a movie with a white woman named India. We should discuss that too.
Well, I suppose. Yeah. I don't know how I feel about that, but I mean, yeah.
Vivien Leigh's home country.
That's true. Yes. There's another scene where she's like really laying it on thick in front of Leslie Howard as Ashley Wilkes to basically just get his sympathies. And she's just doing this over the top crying bit. I would call it a bit. But then also sort of like looking at him to see if it's working. I mean, just
so funny.
She's really just relishing, I think, in the sort of wickedness of her character. And that's what makes her so fun to watch, I think. You know, not in the sense that you're rooting for her all the time, I would say, but she just has such a way about her that it's just kind of fearless. Like, I don't care how I'm coming across to people. It's none of my business anyway. I'm going to do what I want. And, you know, later on, what actually needs to be done when she's like picking up the pieces after everything's burned down and asked to actually step up into a leader position and really do things for the benefit of her community rather than herself. I think she does make that transition really seamless, I would say. And I don't know, it's just remarkable to me that Vivien Leigh just has such a femininity, I think, in the way she can sort of float through a room. But then also sort of have like kind of an aggressive demeanor sometimes, you know, and she can really just do both in the course of one scene, just like batting her eyes, but then also having just this ferociousness.
Yeah, like viperishness, and then also like strategic. Yeah.
Right. Always thinking. Yes. She would be a good Survivor player.
Right. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, she does kind of
Yeah.
feel like the ultimate reality show contestant in certain ways.
Yes, I guess so. But then obviously she has her vulnerable moments where we do see a different side of her, like, when she's reacting, I think, beginning of, what am I trying to say? Leading up to the intermission. Yes.
Oh, yes. Which is, by the way, though, like, I'm sorry to use such a like boring 2020 term, but like the ultimate Karen speech, just like "I'll never go hungry again," is so like the indignity of me in this particular moment. It's like no one is thinking about you. It's so funny.
She is the center of her world. Yeah.
Right.
But I think just like when she's looking at what's happened to her community and like looking through that building that's so dilapidated and just the hurt in her eyes and just like her desperation to just make sure that her farm is okay, and then like realizing what's happened to her parents, even she's just seeing like her whole world fall apart essentially before her eyes. And yeah, it's all leading up to that like big defiant Karen moment.
Right.
And it's truly an iconic cinematography. But on top of everything, it's just like I feel like you can get to that part of the film and just be like, that's it. Like that feels like the performance, like give her the Oscar already. But then she also has another entire 2 hours to give you even more.
No, exactly. I mean, like, I think her first line in the movie is "fiddle-dee-dee," and like the choice she makes,
her catchphrase,
like, how that sounds so organic coming out of her mouth is already like how did you do that? What a ridiculous thing to say. And the way she says it with such like disdain, like "fiddle-dee-dee," like I just like I proved you wrong, somehow.
Right.
Or
right.
Get out of my face, fiddle-dee-dee. Yeah.
Yes. Well, what do we think of kind of her relationship with Clark Gable, the Rhett Butler character?
I mean, it does hurt the movie that the final note is him for once and for all showing her up. It's like, okay, I don't care about him that much. Like, it's not about him. Like, he shouldn't be positioned this way. I do like throughout the film the way he teases her, basically being like, I'm all you're good enough for. Like,
listen.
Here I am, like the definition of a cad. Here I am with whatever, Ona Munson, like whoring it up. By the way, love her in this movie. What a fun performance, Belle Watling. I mean, pitch perfect for the role, and something the fans of the book got right. Like, he was immediately the name everybody agreed on.
Oh yes, yeah. You can't see anyone else in that performance at all. Yeah, but I think like when she's dealing with after they've gotten together officially and they're having babies, I think that's kind of where things feel the most sympathetic towards Scarlett.
Right.
And I think it still works having her in this like more mature mode, and just like the fights that they're having, I do think you're very much on her side. So yeah, I just think she really just keeps everything together for as long as this film is, and it is long,
right?
And you feel the length. She just is totally in command from beginning to end, and it's so remarkable to me. A very complex character to play, and to not try to be too like winking to the audience in terms of like, but you still like I still want you to like me, sort of, She is like,
she's operating on the force of will. Yeah. And it's not about stopping and being and inspiring anybody.
Right. Girl boss Scarlett O'Hara. Yeah.
But also I just want to say, like, as you said, you do feel the length and stuff, but man, so rewarding to watch in certain parts. Again, the funny is often very contemporary, I think. Like, holds up funny.
Yeah, truly is like one of those performances where, in the context of this being a problematic film, which we can pretty much mostly agree on, she 1000% holds up the most of any aspect of this film. So
yeah, I mean, there are just certain like old movies. Like, don't you ever always feel like people are asking you broadly, like, what's an old movie I could watch? And you're like you want to like fall down. You're like my brain is filled with these suggestions. But there are a couple of movies I think that are gateways into sort of becoming into old films. Like you can like like for instance, if you recommend Rear Window to somebody, I feel like that like gets people in the door. They're like, it's entirely engaging, and yet it's completely old-fashioned too. So it gives you a taste of what we like about old movies. And Vivien Leigh in this movie too, there is just so much going on that, as you said, kind of feels contemporary, like reality TV. And so I think it's a good gateway into the tenaciousness of actresses at that time and what we used to give people like her that, you know, was so delicious and different then.
Exactly. Yeah. Here's something truly upsetting, though. She only made $25,000 for this film. She was on set for 125 days. Clark Gable.
Mind-boggling.
Clark Gable was there for 71 days, so about half that, and made over quadruple that amount of money. So, Hollywood.
Right. Luckily, she had Olivier there to hold the purse strings or whatever,
Yes.
as they did, you know, Blithe Spirit for the 8th time together.
Yes, exactly. Well, this review from Variety said, Miss Leigh's Scarlet commands first commendation as a memorable performance of wide versatility and effective earnestness. She possesses all the physical requirements for the part. With her youth, looks, and abundant talent, Miss Leigh springboards from wind to a box office factor in the film market. So, A Star is Born. There you go.
Yes. Do you know what's funny? And then the next year, she was one of the people who auditioned for Rebecca, which a movie you'll get into. What's crazy is how all wrong she is for it.
I know.
It's weird to see Vivien Leigh be all wrong for something.
Like, I get it on paper, but I don't think that would work.
She can't, because she is successfully a naive in Streetcar, sort of, you know, and so you'd think it would kind of work out, but man, all wrong.
Yeah. I mean, Joan we'll get to it. Never mind. I don't want to do too much of a tangent, but let's just talk about why we think Vivien Leigh won this Oscar. I feel like in most of our discussions, we actually have to have like a true discussion of like, how did they end up winning? But in this case, I sort of feel like obviously she was always going to win this, right?
Right. I mean, like it's apparent from the giantness of the actress search to how many Oscar nominations it was going to get in general. No movie had ever been this huge. No movie had ever been this popular. Even like the use of color in this way, I'm sure made it a sure thing. And then of course there's just it's the ne plus ultra of actress performances. Just like, and there's never a point in the movie where you're in doubt about that. Again, the first scene where she's talking to the two guys, and sort of like being coy and also rolling her eyes. It's like, it's in the bag right then. It's in the bag 3 seconds in. And then you get 4 hours of that. So.
Yeah, exactly. What's interesting is just from reading is that like it wasn't necessarily thought of as a slam dunk necessarily in terms of like Bette Davis had this huge critic support and was thought to be certainly in the running to get her third already. And then, of course, Vivien Leigh comes along. But it still feels like something might happen here where, like, Vivien Leigh won the New York Film Critics Award. And I just love from reading at the time, there was, like, pushback about that. Because so many critics were in the tank for Bette Davis, it was like, well, how did this happen? How did Vivien Leigh win when Bette Davis is right there?
It's a comfort zone thing. But Bette Davis is the person we give awards to.
Exactly. Yes. Who's this woman? We don't know if she's going to continue a career after this. Maybe this was a fluke. That was sort of the sense. But from reading Inside Oscar, there was definitely a feeling that Greer Garson and Irene Dunne, happy to be there, probably didn't have a chance. Greta Garbo kind of didn't either, but at least MGM tried to do somewhat of a campaign. Not that she had any part in that, because she famously did not care about this at all. Like, beyond even.
Wouldn't that be mind-boggling if she was like, "This is the one thing I want, an Oscar"?
Right.
You know.
Yes.
It's actually in a couple of ways she does remind me of Isabelle Huppert, except Isabelle Huppert loves awards, which is my favorite thing about her.
She was like elated to win a Golden Globe. So
no, she won. I believe she won a Gotham, and like her wrist was against her head, a la Scarlett O'Hara. Like, couldn't believe it. Yeah.
Yes. I love that. But yeah, pretty much it didn't feel like it should be close, and yet apparently it was close, because I was reading that Bette Davis came within a few votes of winning in the end.
I mean, honestly, the fact that Robert Donat won tells you that it would probably be close, right? Because to my eyes, Clark Gable definitely should have won.
Yeah, or Jimmy Stewart. Truly,
Jimmy Stewart I enjoyed too. Laurence Olivier, I guess, would be third or fourth.
Yeah, very hot in that movie, but that's about all I got for that. Yeah, well, we will give our official declaration of who we think was the runner-up. I feel like I already sort of said it there, but
definitely
we can sort of talk more about it a little towards the end. I do want to get to a few Twitter questions. Okay, this is from Christoph N. Is Scarlett O'Hara the kind of role that would have won the Oscar for any actress who plays her, unless she's completely miscast or blows it?
Well, I would reframe that as there's no reason to make this movie unless it's like an A+ performance. I would compare it to like Le'Veon Rose in that way. Like there's no reason to make that movie unless you get somebody who is a dynamite parallel to the real thing in that case, can, bring you the vulnerability you need, bring you like the familiar Edith Piaf, whatever. Yeah. So in other words, if she weren't perfect, the movie wouldn't have been made, I don't think. So
fair.
I think the answer is mostly to that answer, yes.
Right. I think it has to be close enough to the level of what Vivien Leigh did, which maybe a few could have been capable of. Maybe a Jean Arthur, who I absolutely adore, could have done something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I do think like the sheer duration of Gone with the Wind could have helped any decent actress to at least get a nomination. But it's the win that is, I think, the difference there.
Right. And again, we just said, like, again, when you're up against Bette Davis, I don't think it's a sure thing, especially when Bette Davis is pushing her own boundaries, when she's markedly doing something new.
Right. This is from Jeffrey Kerr. If you were forced to cast a new film adaptation of Gone with the Wind, which we shouldn't do, but which of today's
the world's crying out. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Which of today's actresses would be your choice to play Scarlett O'Hara?
Ooh. Well, the recent news of the Madonna biopic inspires similar thoughts in me. It's like, who has that pugnacious, rollicking, fun, awful thing? Who has all that that personality? So similarly, I feel like Florence Pugh is pretty close to what you want. The presence of mind, the sophistication level, the headstrong quality. Like, she would probably be one of the final contenders, I think.
I would love that. Honestly, I think it would just go to Margot Robbie.
Which is interesting because she's not interesting.
Well, some people do find her interesting, clearly.
She's good. I've enjoyed her in certain films, but like never like crying out to play like...
I know. Yeah.
Anything.
I just feel like the sense of like Hollywood will give her... She's like at the top of the list at this point. And is the sort of thing where like she can sort of play the genteel nature of it, but then also sort of like the independent feminist spirit sort of thing. I don't know how effective it would be, but it feels like something that would happen. So
yeah, but I feel like someone like Florence has like the particular like bleakness, that is required of
a little bitterness,
the transformation in this. Bitterness. Right. Yeah. Again, maybe it could just be the English. They've got that kind of roiling in them.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know why I also thought of Elizabeth Olsen would probably be like a contender at least. For that.
I mean, I love her, and I would love her to be free from this jail she's in, where she makes these goddamn movies and TV shows I'll never watch anyway.
Yeah. But I feel like she could sort of play off like the lower voice aspect of the Scarlett O'Hara sort of thing, like the little bit of the bitterness. But anyway, hopefully that never happens to begin with. And this is just a hypothetical discussion. Moving on to Fritz and the Oscars.
Familiar.
Yes. If Betty had won, how would her win be seen today?
I think it would be I think it might taint what we even thought of Bette Davis, I think. I think Dark Victory is generally somewhat well regarded. It's not like The Star or something in her career where I'm just like, what was even going on here? But it would be thought of as a grave misstep because obviously Gone with the Wind, the legend of the movie. I mean, there's always a new wave of new fans for that movie, and reason to talk about that movie recently, it hasn't been as positive, but there's always just a reason for that movie to reemerge, whereas Dark Victory, there never has been.
Right. I don't know if it would be on the level of like Judy Garland losing for A Star Is Born, but like maybe it would be that general feeling. Maybe it would even cause a little bit of backlash on her part, kind of like with Louise Reiner winning back-to-back, how that sort of was just like so much to live up to that, like, how do you move on from 3 Oscars already? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think also it wouldn't be like a Judy Holliday win where you think, oh, she did great. Is she towering over the rest? I don't know, but I can see it. I can see why you chose her. It wouldn't be like that, I don't think.
No,
I think it would be way less charitable towards Betty.
Yeah, I think it would have felt like favoritism within the Academy, for sure.
That would have been the moment Betty went, like, quote-unquote corporate. Like, oh, she's the establishment pick, you know?
Right. Wow, Bette Davis, the establishment.
I know, right. And we...
Anyway, yeah.
Don't love that timeline at all.
No. Everything worked out. John T., I love this question. Is the female lead role in Love Affair cursed? Irene Dunne, Deborah Carr, Annette Bening, all great Oscar nominees that perpetually got snubbed by Ampus. Yeah.
I think the short answer is yes. Yes,
Yeah.
It just actually is. And you
great
know who
point.
cursed it? Maria Ouspenskaya during...
Wow.
Right. Offset, you know, next to the Wolfman and whatever cauldron she was working with that day. She said, you know, threw the dust in and there it was.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it might be cursed. Yeah. I mean, listen, Annette still has time. Let's be clear.
And she gets better and better.
Yeah, so.
You a fan of Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool?
I have not seen that film.
She is really great in it.
I've heard.
And I think
She
Jamie
really
Bell's
does
so good,
look
too.
like Gloria Graham, so I can believe it.
Right, which I had never pieced together before in a way that makes me ashamed, like, you know how casting is the gay superpower? Like, I never put that together before. Anyway. So.
Yes. Gabe Gorin said, how did Greer Garson get nominated in lead despite being a supporting performance?
It is baffling. But it's also, Goodbye Mr. Chips is a beloved film, I think, at the time, too. And I think she was a new enough presence and a novel enough presence that people were intrigued. So why not? That said, do people hate Merle Oberon?
Apparently.
What are your feelings about that performance?
In Wuthering Heights?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, it's good. You prefer the Kate Bush song to the Merle Oberon performance.
I am hot and cold on Merle Oberon, so.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like, her nomination that she got for Dark Angel is not good. So, as far as the Greer Garson thing, I think for lead, I think there was a feeling like we want to push this person as a star, quote unquote, and stars belong in lead.
Yeah, that's what it is. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, of course, she became one, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think she's technically the female lead of Goodbye, Mr. Chips, which, like, I've heard people argue even today, like with Patricia Arquette in Boyhood, like, she's the female lead, therefore she should be in lead, which I don't, that it's very silly. I don't understand that argument.
It's also, it's always hard for me to get upset about because I do think the definitions of lead and supporting are different per every movie too. So to get too empirical about it feels like getting lost in the weeds to me. That said, I understand there are certain infractions that feel obvious. Like it is mind-blowing to me that Patricia Neal won for that performance, for example, even though she was awesome in it. But, you know, like it's even a smaller part than Melvin Douglas, who won supporting anyway. See, now I'm already lost in the weeds. You see, you can spend all your entire life on this.
Yeah. Eric Maxwell Brunn said, I love Greer Garson, but isn't this a supporting role? Yes, it's a supporting role. Moving on.
Yes, Virginia, this is a supporting role.
Yes. And this is from our friend Andrew Carden.
King of the Oscars, yes.
Absolutely. Truly. My first guest on this, so.
Oh, I'm certainly he'll be back, I assume, but go on.
Oh, yes, of course. Let's imagine Garson was instead nominated in supporting, where she belonged. Who gets her slot? And he lists 3 possibilities here. Merle Oberon for Wuthering Heights, Claire Trevor for Stagecoach, or Judy Garland for The Wizard of Oz.
Well, I guess it wouldn't be Judy Garland or would it, like, okay, the juvenile Oscar thing, did they slot it there because I assume the juvenile Oscar was just given to her, and that means she was taken out of contention, so it wouldn't be her. So
Yes.
I guess the answer would be, because we're not really in the business of being obsessed with Claire Trevor yet either. So
Didn't
who
she
do you
have a
think?
nomination for Dead End?
Sorry, she did have the Dead End nomination, right?
Yeah.
So I guess maybe her.
Yeah. And I support it. I love Claire Trevor. She's great in Key Largo too.
I think Fritz, or is he the one running this Best Supporting Actress poll? And like, I
Yes.
just had to vote down Claire Trevor, and there's blood on my hands. It's a horrible feeling.
It hurts. It really hurts. Yeah, I think, look, maybe Merle Oberon, like Laurence Olivier gets in, Geraldine Fitzgerald gets in. You know, she was a previous nominee. Hard to
I like
tell.
the overlap between actors and other like Thomas Mitchell being in Gone with the Wind, winning for Stagecoach, and then Geraldine Fitzgerald, who's in Dark Victory, who nominated for Wuthering Heights. Lots of interesting stuff going on.
Yeah. This is from Owen Daly. Of the women who got 3+ nominations during the first 12 years of this category, who had the strongest list of nominations? Norma Shearer, Irene Dunne, Greta Garbo, Janet Gaynor, Bette Davis. So this is
Strongest list of movies or performances?
Says strongest list of nominations. So I assume that means performances.
I'm doing my best. I'm piecing this together. I think just
You're
the
doing
way
a beautiful
Betty,
mind right now.
Yeah. I think you have to say Bette Davis because I think she redefined what a Best Actress performance is. Like what you can bring to a part.
Yes. So having seen all of their nominations now, I don't think there's anyone that has like a perfect record there, but I do think Bette Davis is probably the best of the bunch. There can be a little bit of sameness in her performances sometimes, like the Bette Davis type, but it's a type that I happen to like, so there you go.
It's essential too. I mean, if you took these performances out, there would be a hole in movies, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. This is from Sean Hall. Having covered all the pre-code years and a few under the production code, have you noticed a big difference in the types of female performances nominated before and after 1934? I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot more freedom, at least in terms of, well, I guess in terms of writing. Like there was more freedom to have, you know, leading performances from women who are playing prostitutes and things like that, and sort of lower class people as well. I mean, for me, it's like look no further than Norma Shearer, who is doing something like The Divorcee and other kinds of like loose and fun kinds of roles pre-code. And then she becomes the queen of MGM and the production code happens. And now she's playing Juliet and she's playing Marie Antoinette and Elizabeth Barrett, you know, more refined roles, very more respectable.
And Jesus, more boring. God, is that Barrett's movie? I can't even.
Yes, literally lying down for most of the film.
Yes.
So
I literally was like, the prevailing image I have is her lying down. Yes.
Yes. But having said that, I do think there is less mugging for the camera after the production code. So there's that positive where we actually have actors who have adjusted to the talkies. So there's that. That's what I would say.
That's a beautiful answer. I will not embellish on it.
Okay. I guess this is the part where we get to the Judy Garland of it all. Baby Annette says, what do you think prevented Judy from getting in?
Well, children were not legally human beings at the time. So I think they were they were embarrassed about Benita Granville or something, and they thought we can't possibly let that happen to Judy in the leading categories. So
Right. Yes. Too young. That's it. Too young.
Right. No, they're like pets.
Yeah. This is from Gordon at Mark Wahlberg. Where would Judy Garland rank among these performances for you had she been nominated?
I mean, Judy Garland, if she were in these rankings, it would be a ghost in the machine. It would really mess with the gears for me. There's a whole different dimension to think about because it's like the polar opposite of Scarlett O'Hara even. And really what she goes through is not at all the same as any of the other nominees. So I think the answer would be it would be my second favorite.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Second to Vivien. I do think it's a deceptively difficult part, and she completely nails it. Truly, like the best example of like that specific wide-eyed type that in the history of cinema. So, yeah.
Right. a Pollyanna that has a lot more going on. Yes.
Right, exactly. Luke Valet said, so where was Jean Arthur's nomination?
I mean, where's the Jean Arthur Foundation where we all gather and talk about Jean Arthur all the time?
Yes.
I mean, it's just a fucking tragedy that we're not just spending more time on her. She's so captivating and cool and not contrived and just immediately charismatic.
And my favorite thing about looking at the stories of old Hollywood is seeing the actresses who are deemed not cooperative and realizing like the other side of that and seeing that they actually had like, you know, a real sense of who they wanted to be, which made them considered least cooperative. In this case, she was actually voted least cooperative actress at one point by some like awful poll. And yeah, I think it's a shame that she's not here, being for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You know, she's phenomenal. I've talked about her many times on the Best Picture series as well. I don't know, but maybe there was something happening for her behind the scenes where she was considered not nice enough to be in this ranking. So
she's the one who did the play version of Born Yesterday, right?
Yes.
And then had some sort of like nervous, it couldn't go on or something, and eventually it got to Judy Holliday.
She had a lot of stage fright sort of thing.
Correct.
From what I understand. So yeah, she should be here. Kick out Greer Garson, and it's a great lineup.
Yep, definitely.
This is from I'm a Witch, duh. Do you think the women from The Women canceled each other out, or was that an MGM decision to not campaign any of them to prevent further drama?
I enjoy everybody in that movie while I'm watching it, but then if I think about it like a week later, the only one I remember is Rosalind Russell in terms of like delivering character. So I feel like maybe it naturally self-eliminated.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think maybe there were too many cooks. Just not only with like so many actresses to choose from and to like campaign, but also a lot of egos behind the scenes too.
Rosalind Russell also looks exactly like Violet Chachki in that movie, if you're a fan of RuPaul's Drag Race.
There you go. This is from Zeta Short. How many nominations should Joan Crawford have received during the 1930s?
So what are we talking about here? Like Grand Hotel?
Yeah. She did, I think she did Possessed,
right?
That version, and then she remade it again in the 40s.
I don't know. I mean, like, I don't crave Joan Crawford, really. I like her in a couple of movies, never my favorite. Sort of in the old Greer Garson community of you fill out the requisite leading lady uniform well, but some of the charms are lost to me.
Yeah, fair. I can't really speak to her too much in the 30s necessarily. I just haven't seen enough of her work to really say that she earned a nomination that was missing, but listen, she's great in Mildred Pierce. We'll get to it.
Right.
Last question from KFlea208. What do you think of making the acting categories a sliding scale of nominations like Best Picture used to be? Maybe cap it at 8 instead of 10.
I absolutely hate this idea. I think 5 is... I hate looking at the disorganization of there being too many nominees. Like, the Emmys make me sick. Just pick 5. And by the way, I feel the same way about Best Picture, too. If you look at any of the recent Best Picture nominees, lists of Best Picture nominees, you can almost always get it down to 5 in terms of who could actually win it. Like this past year, like you're telling me Mank is a Best Picture nominee. That's a mistake. You have to feel bad about that. Apparently, as human beings, we're only capable of making 5 good decisions in this area, and then afterwards 6, 7, and like Promising Young Woman, I wouldn't have put that in either. There's one other one I didn't like. Anyway, well, you'll get to that in 10 years from now. But
yes. Trial of Chicago 7.
That's exactly what I meant. Trial of the Chicago 7.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. Once we get beyond 5, we're sort of lost in the weeds, I suppose. I mean, the only thing that I've thought about, you're probably going to hate this idea, but I'll just throw it out there. If there is a 6th actress who gets to a certain threshold of like the total amount of votes, and is like within 5 votes of being in the nomination total or in the nominees, I think that's close enough that they should be nominated. They have enough support to be like situations like that possibly, but otherwise I certainly wouldn't want it to be more than 6.
I would hope that would write things like either Amy Adams for Arrival or
Right.
the same year Annette Bening for 20th Century Women.
That's one where
So
you
for
want 7.
yes, so for that year, I will allow it. But at the same
Thank you.
time, 5 is just it's such a crisp number. It's
It is.
I have 5 fingers on my hand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it feels right. Yeah. Okay, well, we're at our final segment here where we discuss who we think was truly the runner-up here. I mean, obviously we have like the gossip that said it was Bette Davis, but do we think anyone else could have come close to that?
Well, you're right. The novelty of Greta Garbo getting in on this particular nomination, there might have been some oomph there, but I think the deal is people were, in a Bette Davis trance. Just why even turn away from this woman? She's been so strong for us, been so exhilarating. So it absolutely has to be her.
Yeah, and also we didn't even mention this, that she was in 4 box office hits in 1939 as a star. Mm-hmm. Like, she was fully like, it was the year of Bette Davis. She had Juarez, she had The Old Maid, she had The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex. So like, it was all about her, and that's the part where I can see in the context of 1939, like, look at this woman who has completely dominated this film year and is showing even more layers that we didn't know she was capable of. And so,
only a few years before, you would honor an actress for having a great year as opposed to just a great performance. So it's possible there was some holdover from that too. Yeah.
But wild to me, though, even still, just looking at it, that people have said that Bette Davis came within a few votes of winning. Like, truly, what is that alternate reality? Do we have flying cars now? Like, what happens?
It's uncomfortable. No, I think it's full Back to the Future too.
Yeah, I believe
Biff is president, etc.
Yeah. Well, this is probably another obvious question, but I have to ask it anyway. Who would you have voted for from this lineup?
I would have to vote for Vivien Leigh. In that the part of my brain that is still a hardcore Madonna stan, just the go out there and bulldoze them and like ruin some lives and laugh in men's faces and also be obsessed with men. Just like that part of my brain is completely activated when I watch this performance. There's no second place to me.
Yeah, totally agree. This is in the top 5 of best actress performances ever, and is just untouchable. I love Bette Davis. I like Greta Garbo in these 2 roles that I feel like obviously they're in that like second tier for me. Irene Dunne, Greer Garson towards the bottom. I mean, certainly there's like some distance between Irene Dunne and Greer Garson, but it's I'm all about Vivien Leigh here. So the Oscars got it right this year. Congrats. It doesn't always happen. So there you have it.
And the regality of Vivien when she accepted the Oscars too, as she I'm sure recited a pre-written speech.
Yes.
Legendary.
Absolutely. There would have been truly, like, if Twitter was around, so many stans of Miss Vivien Leigh for so many reasons.
I would be problematic. I'd be getting up in, who's ever mentions. I'd be like tweeting bees at Norma Shearer or whatever. Like,
wow. She doesn't need the aggravation. Come on.
I know.
She just wants to live her life. Anyway, there you have it. 2 hours of great stuff. Louis, thank you so much. This was a blast.
Oh, thank you. And we kept it under Gone with the Wind length, so I call it a victory.
Hey, yeah. Like, if you want to sync it up with Gone with the Wind, we're just up about the intermission. So,
right.
There you go.
God as my witness, we're stopping now. Yes.
Very good. Well, obviously, you're invited back anytime you want. I'm sure you'll have other years that you're passionate about down the line, 70s, all that.
Oh, yeah.
I'll certainly get you on for a Jane Fonda. Let's just say
good.
that.
All right, good. Oh, yeah, or 69, because then I get Jane Fonda and Maggie Smith. So
perfect. That might be actually great. So where can people find more of your work?
For some reason, I'm still on Twitter. I'm going to keep doing it till I get it right. I'm at Louis Virtel, Louis, like St. Louis, Virtel, Virtel. I write for Jimmy Kimmel Live, who's a heterosexual man who makes jokes. If that kind of weird fetish is your thing. tune into that. And I host a podcast called Keep It on Crooked Media, where we talk about pop culture every week. And I insert names like Miriam Hopkins to delight people like Kevin.
Yes. To the bewilderment of 95% of the audience. Yes.
Alienating people is what I do on this podcast.
And the others have to just sort of nervously laugh and pretend that they know what you're talking about.
That's the one. That's what I like.
Yes. So, of course, you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to hear even more Oscar nonsense, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/andtherunnerup is. So there you have it, folks. We're done with Best Actress in the 1920s and 30s. It's so much fun talking to all of my guests that I had on this first season. And I will be back in February to start talking about the 40s. We'll also have some coverage of this current year's Oscars by then, because the nominations will be out. So you will have time to prepare for the episode on 1940, where the nominees were Bette Davis in The Letter, Joan Fontaine for Rebecca, Katharine Hepburn in The Philadelphia Story, Ginger Rogers in Kitty Foyle, and Martha Scott in Our Town, the winner being Ginger Rogers. So that's your homework. And until next time, thanks again, Louis.
Pleasure being here. I'll be in my Kitty Foyle costume listening to the next one.
Perfect. And I will bid you all adieu.